Hello everyone, Zabub here, and before we get started with today's story, I wanted to thank you all so much for the recent support. I never expected the last video to do as well as it did, and it means a lot to me that it did do so well, and that there's so many new faces here. Thank you all for joining me in this journey, and thank you so much for 1,000 subscribers. So I wanted to do a Q&A for my 1,000 subscriber special. If you guys are interested in that and you want to participate, just ask your questions. I'll make a community post and you guys can ask your questions there and it'll go up right after this video. Or if you want, you can ask your questions in this actual video and I will try to respond to them in my next video after a couple of days go by. So yeah, if that sounds fun, then please participate, and thank you guys so much for the recent support. It means so much to me. I've been doing YouTube for at least 6 or 7 years now, on and off. Obviously, a lot of my older videos are privated, as I kind of got into my style and flow of how I wanted things to go, but it means a lot that I'm finally reaching this point in my YouTube career, and I really appreciate you guys for being along here in this journey with me. So, yeah. Enough talk. Let's get on to today's story. And thank you once again. I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner's name's been changed, obviously, for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner past college, specifically when in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things aren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? Okay, I'm aware that you probably aren't actually asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is fucking great, actually. There may be 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average about a little over minimum wage. But meanwhile, Lone Star's whipping up a mean $50 an hour, and that hourly rate is due to one single solitary reason, no matter what anyone tells you. Because of him. My first day on the job was fine, more or less. I'd worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules like some areas in the restaurant need to be spotless at all times. Others, boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve the customers quickly. Oh, but not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't actually like it when you show up too fast, believe it or not. You gotta give them some time to feel the floor underneath their boots, to miserably stare ahead and mourn what could have been. You know, diner stuff. They're here because they want to be alone, pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghosts, rules extend to the cooks here as well. If you were somehow, secretly, celebrity chef Marco Pierre White, in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible. Not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good. That's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched to the occasion quite well. You want intentional, pinpoint precision mediocrity? Well, you've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch, brought to them at medium speed, with a semi-predictable cadence of a waiter or waitress check-in afterwards. Done, done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day, I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it, but fuck me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look in the gift horse's mouth, more of a skeptical side-eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills. Set it on your first day. Gotta be good at following the rules. And when it's an important rule, you better be damn well perfect. High expectations here. Right. High expectations. Did you think I'm joking? No, ma'am. I guess. Why did I even speak up? I guess I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It's still work, but the whole thing seems fair? Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Booyah. She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look. I don't run this ship, and following the rules here means that you take care of yourself. I'm sorry? I'm your employer, sure. And I pay you well to be here, sure. But you should be aware, there is plenty more going on here than just you and this diner. She glanced down at her watch and then sighed. I usually have this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it, so... The Coles notes. If you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest, and without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul. A week's worth of pay on the house. The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to put my head down and just do the work, I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun. My coworkers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I'd found a place to park the failures of my life, a place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember ever seeing him enter. Brown, curdy shirt, short hair, mid-50s it seemed. A reasonably calm smile, a pretty normal-looking dude. I started making my way out from the back and headed towards him, and immediately I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch, enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin. "Important rules," she said. "What?" "You remember our chat about the rules? Well, this is the most important one, okay?" "That man over there in the corner." She motioned to the man who had caught my attention, sitting upright, hands softly clasped together, a coy smile on his face. "You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him." "But he's a customer." Her hold on me intensified. She was hurting me, almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me. "I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table. You don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can shout across the room at him if you'd like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that. But you don't approach him, and you do not take his order." Or? A sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. He's different every time, but it ain't pretty. I watched him from the short distance that I'd been afforded. It was hard not to, and she did too. Unlike the other customers, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to take part in the uncomfortable ritual of the lackluster Egg Benedict over rye. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious, mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not long after, so I didn't actually get the chance to watch him leave. Regardless, though, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job, I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. It felt nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars, to see the shimmer and shine, and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would just stay this simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up about once a month. The rare times I actually got to see him, I'd try to squeak in the odd question to my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from? And has anyone ever spoken with him? They were all mechanically met with, "I don't know, I don't know, and if you're scared, you're welcome to quit." Then, as fate would have it, one day, Boss Lady fell incredibly ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling uncomfortably within the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month when our customer would typically appear. And of course, there he was, right after she went home. To my benefit, the other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by a foundational curiosity that I just couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing from across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir! What brings you here?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. Clever. "I said, what brings you here?" I called out again, a few more notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. And to my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not really sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me, but the man sounded exactly how he looked. "I'm sorry, dear," he said. "I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come over here and ask me again?" Nope. I was good. "And I don't mean to be rude about the service," he continued, "but it feels as if no one's taken my order for quite some time now." I let the exchange in there, diverting my attention back to the other guests. As always, he eventually disappeared without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. A backroom conversation about him remaining dreadfully short while he was there, just, he's here, and he's gone. And the odd, when we really needed to say it, I feel weird about this. It took me a while to understand why my brazenness to address this strange, middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting the otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right in the moment to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, Boss Lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharply dressed agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the bar, though I seldomly paid it mind, beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down the tables, only an hour into my shift, Mel swung by and said, "Hey, I want you in the meeting with the big boss if you have a few." The big boss? Sure. Yeah, come in. Just, if you don't mind me asking, who is... She let her eyes speak with her unwritten rules to me. Questions equals generally bad. "Thank you for the reminder, ma'am." We were maneuvered to a back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in, the aforementioned agent that I mentioned earlier. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes, papers, and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted like a deer into headlights, no concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. "How long she been here?" he asked in his gruff western drawl. 6 months, she said. "You trust her?" "I trust her, yeah." He let his eyebrows say, "If you say so," and then went on with it. "Alright, so apparently, you had a visit from the Wandering Man last week. You," he said, motioning to Melanie, "were out. But you," attention now shifted to me, "weren't. Give me the lowdown." "The Wandering Man?" The ancient caught the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you told this girl nothing, haven't you?" he said to Melanie. "Sir, I know it sounds weird," she said, "but I personally feel as if the man is almost I don't know, drawn to curiosity? Like, maybe, the less I say to those who aren't already in the know, the Wandering Man, the agent cut her off, is our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your fine little establishment. Or should I say, the state's fine little establishment. I'm sorry? I asked. That's correct. The state's. Congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation. The Wandering Man, not just a cutesy little nickname, but our legal definition for this tricky little problem, is a phenomenon we discovered many years ago. At this time, he's just walking the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything's fine and all hunky-dory. A little weird, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things. Grisly things. I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? Have you guys, taken him in for... I almost wanted to cut off my own stupid question, but he ran with it. Nope. And not because we don't want to, but rather because it might not be safe. The cozy mental image that I'd held for this diner was starting to fracture. We have reason to believe that he's a visitor, he said. From? I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers spaced out and seated amongst the eatery were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end of the month window when the Wandering Man was set to arrive in. When he'd appear, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes onto notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us, the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month of working here, that the worker turnover here at the diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it made absolutely no sense to me. Now, even 7 months into the gig, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters, and waitresses from when I'd first started, I'd seen first-handedly just how true her statement was. None of the leavers ever claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of what the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here, and it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed, but not because of the pay. I guess I'm actually not sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now, the ones who understood the vague terms of the situation. Just as Melanie and I, and all former employees did, they stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile with the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered out. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week, and he was a keener. Mega keener. He bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything that he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role for a guy his young of an age was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things at this diner that are strange. Rules that you'll have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed that he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here, I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the Wandering Man in the corner during the same week that we had onboarding new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till, and if we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm stepped out, and I did just that. Grasp his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I'd first started. He recoiled in surprise. Remember that little chat about the rules that we just had? I asked. He nodded meekly as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead with what I believed at the time was no real reason to be here at all, and said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him. Don't talk to him. Just pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag that he was holding in his left hand, and in my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for. "I'm just doing my garbage duty, ma'am," he said, but understood. And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would have liked, so I appreciated his willingness to take on his duty so soon into his employment. I turned back around to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception.
"Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at my table to ask them."
The agents around the room reacted mainly with snickers.
"Seriously, if you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all. Truly."
Even more laughs, but no one bit. And yet as he continued, pointedly,
"I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this establishment for me. I know you..."
As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words that I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting off his hands as he entered through the diner's side door, a door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast, and yet it played out in front of me excruciatingly slow, as if there was a moment, a single solitary second, where I could have stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway and adopting a completely new demeanor. He played a role of a low, miserable, tired man and said,
30 visits. Terrible service every time,"
in a pathetic tone, just as Malcolm walked by. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad out of his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man. "Hey, I got you, Chief. I can have him ring up something for you. What do you..." And then Malcolm froze in place, and the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire cat wide. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering, with what seemed to be an undeniable excitement. The man started getting up from the table, and then, immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the Wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language that I heard blared over a megaphone, nonsensical agent speak that had been seared into my memory forever.
"Alert! Level black! Wandering target is compromised to civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised."
And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me that she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work. On my commute home or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars and put out the wish that Malcolm would be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. The debrief with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. Where was he taken to? Was answered with, "He's gone now." With a perpetual dagger in my soul now, I had only the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be more careful, more watchful, even more diligent. And on days when the wandering man was visiting, the only server at the diner. No exceptions. I knew that the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was weird, our Darwinian setup that they had created. We were a zoo that they could use to learn more about a specific animal, a specific entity, a specific visitor. No dice. They just have to watch him sit now, or wait for him to do something first. I waited the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in, and things were getting quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk through the front door. In the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift, I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then he was right there, standing in front of me. And I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was gonna die. He smiled.
Don't worry. I have my own little set of rules that I play by,
he said. I didn't say a word. This was a no man's land right now.
I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment that you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity. It's a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a reckless species.
Please just go.
I'd like to answer a question about why I'm visiting. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, right?
I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not. He laughed.
The answer is really painfully simple. This little game, this little charade that I'm playing, it's just so unbelievably fun. Please, don't kill me, please. You truly have a wonderful planet. I'll return again soon. Promise. Give me a month. Maybe 2 this time.
A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes.
I'll come back with a new game.
And then, he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time when he was speaking to me, and maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting in a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers, almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in an almost childlike handwriting, there was a note that said,
I brought him back, just like you wished.
The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize there really is nowhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, by open sky. And someone could drop by at any time.